Okay, so today I am, as per request, going to be doing a live response to a video called "Questions Capitalists Have for Communists/Socialists." Now it's pretty clear that this video is a load of steaming garbage. All the questions have pretty much been phrased to take the mickey out of communists, or try and take a mickey. And indeed, there's a lot of repeats. The questions are pretty immature, pretty banal. But I was requested, and a few weeks ago or months, I'm not really sure, I was requested, or I asked out, oh, does anyone want me to review a video? And someone came back and gave me this. So yeah, this will be a live response, all unscripted, all off the cuff of my own sort of knowledge, immediately. So if I do make mistakes or slip of the tongue, then that's probably why. All these questions can be shown to be wrong, by the way. Just because I mess up the explanation doesn't mean that they're instantly made wrong. I'll do the best I can, but I'll warn you now, this is garbage. So let's begin. Questions capitalists have for communists/socialists. Oh, by the way, if you can't hear the video, let me know in the chat, because I've turned the volume up to quite full, but we don't know if it works or not yet. So let me know.
Why do the workers deserve to own the means of production? Economics and sociology, means of production are physical, non-human input used for the production of economic value.
Now, already S-Man has sort of given his sort of worldview away from the start. Why do the workers deserve to own the means of production? Now, obviously, the means of production, like he said, are workers owning and controlling the produce and gains of society. Everyone owns the produce and products of society. Therefore, everyone has a say in society. His argument is essentially that the people who do the work, people who contribute to the production, people who essentially run society, don't make any, don't deserve to have the means of production. As we'll see in a second, he's got some pretty classist things to say.
Such as facilities, machinery, tools, infrastructure, capital, and natural capital. People that buy these things to make business possible are your bosses and CEOs.
People who buy the things to make this possible are your bosses. Now, here we go, and we've already got a pretty classist, pretty ignorant statement. So firstly, the entirety of their wealth is comprised of stolen labor value taken from workers. So the boss has profited off their workers, and consequently, his money or their money is simply generated from the work of others. So already you've got illegitimate funds. But secondly, the machinery they've used, or the tools they've got to have their factory or whatever, that is also from worker produce. So the workers made the factory, and then the boss just claims it for themselves. The workers plow the field and made the farm, and the boss takes that farm for themselves. As always, under capitalism, you have a boss who is the person in charge, profiting off the labor of their workers. And thus saying, oh, well, your boss made it possible is a complete sham, because you're ignoring the labor that went into their boss's wealth.
CEOs are also responsible for handling the 80,000 pages of regulations that you don't have to, and the workers probably would not understand all those regulations and would probably be stressed out and not capable of leading themselves and would need a superior to keep them in check.
So yet again, more capitalist sort of ableism. Not ableism, I'm not talking about classism. Essentially, you see him saying, oh, well, the boss needs to have this recognition of 80,000 pages of regulation. Firstly, if you haven't been paying attention, corporations under capitalism, as we see today, don't even follow regulation. A famous example is Flint in Michigan, where they've not had clean water for 3 years, I think, because regulations weren't followed at a water processing plant. Or something like that. But either way, the regulations weren't followed by the boss, and consequently, everyone is suffering in Flint because they've not got any clean water. But more importantly, workers do know how to read regulations. The fact that a boss would be doing the regulation management, which they don't, by the way, but we have people underneath them doing the regulations and paperwork and stuff. But they do not need to be a boss to have regulations. You can have workers who specialize in the department of regulations and making sure they're jobs and processes meet requirements without making them a boss, without having them profit of other people's labor. The idea that workers are somehow incapable of actually understanding pages of regulation is ridiculous, because you've essentially got you're whittling down a workforce of like millions, billions of people essentially to, oh, they're too simple, they need a boss, when that's not the case. Like, people are capable of understanding rules and tribulations of the workforce, and to imply that an entire workforce needs a boss managing them just to profit off them is ridiculous. Essentially, this first question is based off capitalist apologism and the sort of spinning and lies you see from high-tier Republicans saying, oh, you need to work harder, the boss knows best, all to essentially continue the exploitation and profiting of workers. It's pretty embarrassing, really, that someone's coming out with, oh, why do the workers deserve to own the means of production? Because all it essentially says is that you believe in the hierarchy of the workplace being continued and sustained. And it's pretty silly because, well, no, workers are capable of self-management. It's only the capitalist system that has workers forced into submission, into a working class state in which they're always sort of having to work to survive, and the bosses know best because they've got lots of money and they can say whatever they want and it flies. But anyway, that's question one, and it's downhill from here.
When will you stop using the no truth Scotsman fallacy when someone points out the flaws of socialist/communist nations like the Soviets, Cuba, or Venezuela?
A classical argument, really, isn't it? The no true Scotsman fallacy. Well, guess what, Zach? It isn't the no true Scotsman fallacy. The no true Scotsman fallacy is used to claim that something that's been repeated many times is not the exact actual iteration of that thing. So, for instance, if you imagine a pie baking competition, an apple pie competition, and there's all this like hundreds of chefs and they've all baked their cakes, and a judge turns up and says, no, that's not an apple cake. The crust is a bit too thick. Oh, well, then it goes to the next one. Oh, this isn't an apple cake because the apple filling is not as juicy as and moist as I'd like it. Oh, this isn't an apple cake. It's too overcooked. And every single cake is not the actual perfect apple cake. That is a no true Scotsman fallacy, because the definition is so ridiculously precise and non-existent that you're ignoring every single valid entry of the cake to simply fit your own definition. Socialism, on the other hand, has a direct, defined definition. It's got a specific thing that it has to be, which is the workers owning the means of production and society run by the workers for the workers. The examples listed here, the USSR, Cuba, and Venezuela, are nowhere near that. We saw Stalin have obviously complete centralized control of the country with no worker ownership whatsoever. And Lenin did not even have the chance to pass the ownership of society to the workers, because well, they were in the middle of a civil war. They were unable to realistically transfer power over whilst the war is going on. Cuba is an authoritarian centralized country, which, yeah, they're obviously, they call themselves socialist, but they're not, because Castro's administration holds all the power. There's no worker control of anything. It's all done by the state. And Venezuela, it's a very it's got a lot of private sector within it. It's a capitalist nation still. It's just calling itself socialist, and yeah, they have socialized policies, but we're in a capitalist market and using the tools of capitalism. And again, the Chavez administration does not give the workers the power to do their own decisions with the means of production. So all these examples are wrong, and you're only showing you don't understand what a fallacy is or what socialism is. And these sunglasses are just a bit ridiculous, aren't they?
I mean, it seems that whenever there is a group of people that bring up the idea of the laborers controlling all the means of production in an economy, that it just devolves down into centralized government control. Just
now, gosh. What was I saying? Losing the plot. Mind blank there. What did he say? Yeah, centralized government. Essentially, you see the situation where obviously they call themselves a socialist revolution to begin with, but eventually, over time, it grows into a... I've had a complete mind blank. Flipping it. I need to rewind. Hold on a second. Right.
Examples of that it just devolves down into centralized government control.
Okay, so this assumes that we were in any stage of socialism to begin with, when that isn't the case. You see people use these like examples of the countries he mentioned to claim that socialism was there already, when in actuality it was never there. There was never a state in which the country was worker owned, and as a consequence of that, we don't really have a comparison to make. We can't say, oh well, socialism always devolves into this centralized state, because it was never socialism. And indeed, the place this person is coming from is a sham. Really, it's not true. He's not correctly analyzing the situation presented.
Just like examples of Soviets, Cuba, and Venezuela. Like Lenin, for example, had the ideals of overthrowing the bourgeoisie, and then later came along his successor, Stalin, centralized all control of the economy, and it wasn't really technically what you guys would have considered control of the means of production by the laborers.
So again, he's worked out that Stalin is not an example of a society in which the laborers controlled the means of production. But then he still thinks that this is somehow just some inherent thing to making up lies about socialism by socialists, which is not true. Socialism has never been what Stalin said his nation was, what Stalin's nation was. Socialism has always had a specific definition, which was never met in the USSR. So this place you're coming from is wrong. If you excuse me, I'm going to be back in a second. I just need to sort something out, because I'm not actually sure what happened a second ago. I just do this. I'm really sorry to take time away. But yeah, the first two questions are near the top of how good this is going to get, because it's downhill from here. I've seen this video before. It's downhill from here. I mean, the first two questions, like, they're phrased in a way which show a lack of understanding of the topic at hand, because as you can like sort of hear from these people, they don't know what socialism is. They're just sort of saying the generic apologist rubbish they've been fed from clearly biased and rubbish sources, claiming the USSR was what socialism is, and it's just socialists trying to divert attention from it. It's a bit silly, really. But ultimately, you gotta like move past this if you want to really understand what you're talking about. Anyway, that's all sorted now. Screen share again. Right.
In a communist or capitalist government, do we own our own bodies, or do you guys own our bodies?
Another typical, oh, you got no control under communism argument. And it's, again, rubbish. It's actually true of capitalism, really. If you don't work and agree to have your labor exploited off, you starve. You don't have a place in society. If you don't work and produce profit and sell your labor hours, you won't be able to survive under capitalism. So in actuality, this freedom that this person is talking about, JJ, is lost under capitalism and free under communism, because you don't have to work. You have to have a job to survive, because communists and socialists recognize that society is moving to a point where you don't need to sell your labor hours. You don't need to stop what I'm saying. You don't need a job to survive, because there's not enough. Human labor is not required for many jobs around the world. And people are worth more than their labor hours. People don't need to have a job to be defined in society, so they have freedom. So yeah, again, it's a misunderstanding by JJ here.
Along with most of
The money you make is like, I'm assuming JJ is not a boss, but all money profited and made is exploitation. It's coming from someone else's labor being exploited off. Just because you can't maybe physically see that, it's true elsewhere. So for instance, if I've got even something as basic as a lemonade stand, the labor to produce the lemons to grow the lemons, even to produce the water, to make my table, everything I've made my lemonade stand with, and everything I'm selling on the lemonade stand, somewhere else, someone's labor was profited to bring that to me. And so, where fine, I've made direct transactions, I've squeezed the lemon into the jug, but as a consequence of that, down the line, I've benefited from the exploitation of labor elsewhere. All transactions under capitalism are unethical and exploitation. And thus this my money thing that JJ's come out with is wrong, because his money is not his money, but stolen labor value from other people's money. But I very much doubt JJ is in a position to be saying, oh, you're stealing our money, because I don't, funnily enough, I don't think he is in a position that he's got this like boss status. Anyway, next is Alexander Kingsfallen.
It's not real communism.
It's obvious that it is real. What kind of communism?
This question doesn't even really make sense. I mean, firstly, there's a bit of ableism there with the retarded communists, which, you know, that sort of shows you this sort of level of maturity. This is the same question that Zach asked with the no true communism argument, which again I've already discussed is not the correct application of that fallacy. But as regards to his what is true communism, it's quite simply the workers owning the means of production and controlling and running society for themselves, for everyone. Everyone has a say. And this, the countries these people use to denigrate socialism were not socialist at any point. Like, this is essentially just like criticizing a bicycle for the this is like, yeah, criticizing a bicycle and then saying, oh, a car is dangerous because of these faults of a bicycle. It's like, it's ridiculous. Like, you're not identifying what a car is. You're not identifying what socialism is. So how can you make these criticisms? And in fact, they have to lace it with all these like, oh, retarded commies. It shows you the lack of maturity and the lack of nuance these people hold.
Why do communists always try to convert capitalist countries into communist countries?
Well, as you I'm sure you know, communism is the workers overthrowing the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, and having control of themselves and having a worker-owned society. And as workers are being exploited in the countries they are in, and realistically are not able to leave their countries, it's obvious that they're going to overthrow the government in the situations and places that they are actually in. Really, I don't see why this is ever brought up, really. It's like, it's silly just to say, oh, go and move somewhere else, when with society you think, no, we're going to improve this where we are now, because we're here and we need to help ourselves now. But no, why don't you move to another country? I wonder what's going to be coming up in it later on in his argument.
Wouldn't it be easier to create a brand new country that is communist from the ground up? It is possible.
Sorry to interject. No, it's not. How is it going to be easier for people who are on barely any wages, barely afford to live as it is under capitalism, to just move to another country? Like, these arguments are so ridiculous, but it's clear they're just coming out of a pretty banal, immature place. And this is one of the better people in this video too. This is someone who's actually sort of like thought about stuff they're saying, and it's still rubbish.
And a capitalist society that is independent with just 10 people and have that society be extremely stable.
It's not, is it? I mean, if you're making things and selling them, how are you getting any profit? You're just gonna, if there's 10 people, how are you where are you getting the tools from? You're doing all the work yourself. So what you actually have, which what would actually be, is a you don't eventually turn this into a sort of commune, a communist society, unless capitalists are going to be somehow producing their own labor and their own economic system and doing all this stuff, and somehow making profit off like 10 people. It's ridiculous.
Is it possible to have a similar communist society that is just as stable or more stable?
I mean, I don't know why it would be 10 people, but yeah, communes do exist. In fact, it's more logical to have a system with 10 people where you're all working together than it is a system with like thousands or millions under capitalism, or 10 under capitalism. But yeah, a communist society is achievable, is realistic, because workers working for the benefit of everyone is more productive than workers working for the benefit of a few and producing profit, as we're seeing with society now, where we're sort of stagnating and ruining the planet. Anyway, here that was Humane Mind. This is the incredible Aspie, and you know this is going to be bad just from his face. As we've already established with JJ, it's not your shit. It's stuff that you've got through the exploitation of other people elsewhere around the world, and sometimes like localized to wherever you are now. It's quite clear that all air consumption under capitalism is unethical, and consequently, because said consumption is unethical, no product and no accrued wealth is legitimate because it's come from a profit and exploitation of other workers. So your shit, as you put it, is not yours at all. It's just built up from the work of others.
Go out, go to school, get a job, pay for your own shit.
Apologize for the loud audio there. Is ridiculous screaming. Doesn't really help his case. But anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah, go out, go to school, get a job. Schools and jobs, for instance, are two things capitalism sort of ruins. Firstly, jobs most workers have to survive, and consequently, they clearly aren't improving the situation, and they are forcibly exploited by their bosses. Schools are ruined by capitalism. The introduction of a private market into schools is devastating if you want a populace that is able to produce, able to contribute to society, because it lowers the quality of school for millions. As we see in America, where university is a very college even, it's a price tiered thing. It's easier to get into school and succeed with education if you're wealthy. Again, and as we've already established, wealth is a product of exploitation. I think it's a bit ridiculous that he said, "Oh, get a job, pay for your own shit." It sort of just shows their complete lack of understanding of the situation, really.
Since you guys say
True communism or true socialism.
Just a side note, this music is dreadful, and I apparently keep this is yet again the third time we've heard no true Scotsman fallacy supposedly brought up.
At the very least, never been practiced, not happened at all in human history.
why in the hell should we try it on an international scale?
Yeah, why improve things when you've never tried it before? It's like, what kind of argument is this? Why do anything new? Oh, we've never used electricity before. We can't use it. What if it goes wrong? Why would we use it on an international scale? It's like, well, that's not what progress is. You move forward, you try new things because the current things aren't working. You've got better waiting ahead. Yet again, this person used S-Man used no true Scotsman fallacy incorrectly. We've been over this before. It's not communism if it's not worker owned, and the states that these people use are not worker owned. But it's just like these questions are so poorly formed.
Why would we let it take over the world if we don't know what the consequences are?
I mean, it's quite clear what consequences will be. It'll be no more exploitation of workers, no more stealing of the labor value of people around the world, no more wealth concentrated at the top end of society with the negatives of society thrust onto the working populace. But I think it's pretty insulting to say, oh, it's too risky for you like to move on from capitalism as some like privileged Western capitalist when your entire way of life is built off the exploitation of the third world. It's embarrassing, really.
How do you guys attain this perfect utopia, this perfect socialist / communist utopia in the first place?
Also, I want to point out that it's like when you say utopia, like as though like aiming for a better society is somehow like bad. Like, oh yeah, you want a utopia? Like, well, everyone should. Like, why do you want something that's not a utopia? And no one is saying, oh, it's going to be like this heaven on earth, basically. But as an improvement from capitalism, definitely. If people are saying it's going to be much better than our current society, that's because it's true. Because capitalism is a horrible, horrible system, which leads to exploitation and suffering. And that you can't see that is not a result of like capitalism's greatness or our stupidity, but more a sign that you're not analyzing the situation properly. I mean, you did say no true Scotsman earlier, so perhaps that's not surprising. But anyway,
A violent revolution or gradual bigger government control?
To be fair, this is a legitimate sort of point. Some there's are divisions over how a overthrow of capitalism would be achieved, and some advocate for a sort of shifting government left and left until you eventually have a socialist government and workers can be given the means through the now socialized government. And then there's people who advocate for violent revolution. I think both have credibility, but realistically, capitalism and capitalists aren't going to give away their power. Very rarely do you see people in positions of power completely give it away without any sort of leverage for themselves. And consequently, the capitalist class are going to defend their means of like helping themselves. They're going to defend capitalism, and it's going to be violent. So of course, violent revolution is a very likely possibility. But it's worth pointing out that capitalism itself is inherently violent. You just simply have to look at the situations workers face globally to see that it is, where you work or you starve. That is violence. That is essentially saying your life is threatened if you do not subscribe and agree to the exploitation of your labor. You only have to look at the US foreign policy history to sort of see just how exploitative and abusive capitalism is. Look at countries like Chile, Guatemala, El Salvador. The history of the US is laced with violence to enforce and impose capitalism on the workers and on global nations. So to have this pretense of, oh, you're going to disrupt things, you're going to be violent as a negative is to ignore the violence of capitalism.
Because if you try it with violent revolution, you know that people resist. Plus, not only that, you will have the establishment capitalist government fighting against you as well. But if you do it via gradual government control, which I hear a lot of you socialists go talking about how true socialism and communism is a stateless society, is the laborers controlling the economy, not the government. So if it is via gradual, bigger government control that you're going to attain this, and that kind of defeats the purpose of a stateless society.
Again, some like obvious points made. There'll be resistance, of course. Of course, there's going to be resistance. Rich people aren't just going to suddenly like give away their wealth and power when they like, enjoy having that privilege over everyone else. Which is why there's probably going to be some sort of violence within the revolution. And yeah, that wouldn't be ideal, but capitalism's not ideal. The world is a miserable place because of capitalism. So you know, got to change things. And yeah, communism and socialism, they are stateless, but that's not a case of like hypocrisy from socialists saying, oh, we're going to reform things through the state and then abolish the state. By stateless, I mean no nations, just a worker consolidate across the globe. And people get afraid of it, saying, oh, we're going to be speaking different languages. Oh, we're going to lose our identity. And you're not going to lose your languages. There's still going to be like communities and groups based on sort of language you speak and stuff. And it's not like people in the UK are going to be like, right, now you're French. All it means is that all workers of the world unite and collaborate. It means we don't have to divide ourselves with these arbitrary, like ridiculous borders and supposed national identities. And he's yet again mentioned no true Scotsman, and it's a bit ridiculous because it again demonstrates their lack of understanding of what a fallacy is.
What is it like to be the most uneducated, retarded fuck to ever grace this goddamn
like you just can tell this is not a like video to take seriously when this is one of the questions they've got. You get more ableism. As for what unintelligent, uneducated, it's like, well, you don't appear to know what a fallacy is. You don't know what how do you have to correctly identify a political system. You have sort of any grasp of the theories and analysis that socialists present. You don't even seem to tackle it because of the stuff you've been saying in this video, and not you specifically, JJ, but well, I mean, they're all pretty rubbish. But even so, like, it's just this whole like attitude of like sneering arrogance. It's ridiculous, and just banal like immaturity. Oh, you're retarded. Like, it's not political theory, is it? It's just nonsense. Like, what kind of question is this? Fascism, like, okay. In fact, I find it quite ironic. These people like to say, "Oh, you just call everyone a Nazi," and then they'll pull this. Anyway, Fascism is explicitly a capitalist right-wing idea. Fascism is authoritarian nationalism combined with ultra-capitalism, essentially using force to sustain capitalism. The Nazis, Mussolini, Pinochet, these are examples of fascism. Fascism cannot be left-wing. It's antonym. They're the opposites of each other. One is worker ownership of means of production, and the other is enforced private ownership of means of production, which essentially corporations give them the free rein to do what they want and enforced by an authoritarian militant force. So yet again, Mr. Kingswallen gets it wrong. Like, I'm not actually sure what he's doing in this video because he's just asked like the same question as someone else and then just total nonsense.
Common sense says that their society can and will exist without a government. If so, what happens when somebody in that society refuses to work? How do you deal with that?
An interesting scenario, and one often provided by capitalists, as in, oh, you need capitalism to force people to work. But quite simply, firstly, there's going to be more people than there are jobs, as there are at the moment, because with technology where it is and advancing more, people's physical labor is not as needed. People's capacities as humans is not needed. You don't need thousands of workers when you can have one or two machines doing the job for you. So firstly, it'll be a cut down in the number of jobs. Secondly, people will be able to work where they want instead of being sort of forced into jobs they don't actually want because of the need to survive and make a living. People can actually specialize in areas they want to be in. So instead of seeing thousands of people like miserable and like hating their jobs because of the miserable like slogging machine that is capitalism, you see people actually enjoying their jobs, actually trying their best because they actually want to be there. No longer having to slog it out on minimum wage 24/7. Instead, they can work maybe like a few days a week and then have time to do their other stuff. So when they actually work, it's happy. You seem to think that everyone enjoys being under capitalism and everyone likes making money for like making the pennies they do under capitalism, and it's just not the case. Like people don't enjoy capitalism. Instead, people are forced into working loads because they need money. And this idea that, oh, people are going to be like dropping their tools and be like, oh, where's my money? I'm not going to work under communism. It's ridiculous because people who don't work, that's not a crime. That's not a bad thing. There's plenty of room in society for people who don't necessarily need to be contributing all their hours all the time. And there's like a fairer system in which there aren't people at the top just sitting around doing nothing and forcing their profits, put their labor for others. You've not got that anymore, so there's less work for everyone to do.
Also, how do you stop them from taking from the public supply?
Well, I don't understand this. If you don't work, you don't get stuff. It's because it's a false attitude, really. No one has to starve or suffer simply because they don't work, and there's nothing stopping them from like not doing any work and then still having like a decent life. Like I don't think it's fair or right to make people suffer just because they're not working. All it essentially means is they're just in society. Like there's no like consequence for not working because there are enough people who do work. And yeah, you can say, oh, well, people will just be like, oh, he's working and I'm not, and I'm happy with that, so I'm not going to do anything. But people don't necessarily think like that. Maybe you do, but that is not the case for like most of society. Money is not the only incentive. And indeed, it's only the main core at the moment, because if you don't have it, you die, you don't survive. And if you take away that the death knell of capitalism, you won't see the problem. You have people enjoying their jobs, as I said a second ago. Anyway, now we're back to Mr. Aspie, who just scum, isn't he?
Why is it
So is this now what, fourth or fifth time we've heard no true communism? And it's wrong yet again. The nation was not communist. I don't know like why these people don't seem to understand it. Maybe because if they did, they wouldn't have the videos like this. But it's embarrassing, really. If you can't correctly identify a system you're criticizing, then why are you making a video? Like, you shouldn't be talking about politics if you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm not trying to be like sneering at like elitist or anything. It's just a case. If you don't have the capacity to understand the theories that you're criticizing, then how can you adequately criticize it? It's like saying it's like going into Star Wars and be like, oh, Star Wars is bad because the Force is unrealistic. It's like, well, no, it's a sci-fi. Of course, there's going to be the elements that are going to be there. If you don't understand sci-fi, you don't understand that things happen which aren't meant to be like real world laws, then you can't really criticize the film on those bases. Same thing with this. If you're criticizing communism, but then you can't identify communism correctly, then your criticism is just not worth anything. Like, what are you even saying if you actually think that the USSR or North Korea are communist nations? Like, it's ridiculous.
Sorry to tell you, the entire process that is leading up to what we call communism is communism.
Yeah, sorry to tell you, but these things that are actually defined, like, aren't actually even things you want to call them. I can't even think a sentence ago. This is ridiculous. Like, he is essentially saying that the people who have the theories of communism are wrong, and his version of communism is just applied to anything he wants to call communism. Communism and socialism are defined things, and the countries that you're calling communism weren't communist. The USSR, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, whatever else you want to point to, these nations aren't communist, quite blatantly so in some of their cases, because they aren't worker owned. They're controlled by an authoritarian, dictatorship in many of the cases, and consequently, they can't be called communist by any means at all. And the idea, oh, in the run up to communism, it is still communism. Like, what are you even talking about? It is just like deluded. I'm not even sure why he's in this video. He contributes nothing. Like, and like, I don't. It's and the fact they consider themselves like skeptics and rationals and stuff too. It's just a bit embarrassing, really. Jesus Christ! Like, the sunglasses too, and this music as well. It's like, why?
Resist capitalism.
On devices that were created.
No, there is no hypocrisy there. For many reasons, actually. Firstly, a phone is created with human labor, not with capitalism. Regardless of what system you have, it is possible for humans to pull together their labor and create a phone. Technology exists wherever a system is. It's not because of capitalism. Capitalism just happens to be the system. And so, yeah, exactly. Capitalism is if a phone was invented under socialism, would you just not use it because, oh, it's socialist? Like, no, it's ridiculous to say, oh, these things under capitalism can't be used by anti-capitalists. Like, that's not a situation that is realistic, like, or at all logical. It's like people who use tools made by slavery could still criticize slavery. Like, if that's the society you have, then what choice do you have but to use it? What choice does anyone have but to use products of capitalism? Everything from like a pencil down to a car, up to a car even, is a product of capitalist exploitation of labor. And yeah, it's not great, and obviously no one likes it who's anti-capitalist. But you know, what can we do? Essentially, the situation these people present, where they say, "Oh, you can't use things capitalist if you are anti-capitalist," both ignore the fact that it's not capitalism that created the product, and secondly, that if you were to follow this like arbitrary law you've set and say, oh well, no, we don't want to use anything with capitalism, we'd have to go off into the hills, which we couldn't even do because the hills are owned by someone. So you're essentially saying anti-capitalism needs to die. Essentially, is what you're saying, because everything you can touch in society is a product of capitalism. When of course it's not. It's a product of human labor. And you can, like, it's ridiculous just what these people say all the time. Anyway.
For instance, the video I'm editing right now for this video, using Windows Movie Maker and Windows 10 for this project, capitalism created a lot of our products.
It didn't, though. It was created by people who may have had their labor exploited by a boss. And in fact, if you're going to go by this standard, you should probably not be using that, because this was created using like I'm pretty sure there's like materials that come from mines in Africa, which it's not the best place for human rights standards. I'll say that. But no, it's embarrassing that these arguments are continued, even though they're so like blatantly wrong. Really. Anyway, continue, man. but they don't. Again, clothing's another one. These sweatshops that these are produced in are horrific places of human rights abuse, but American companies and other Western companies place their factories to avoid paying more tax and meeting more regulations. Capitalism is destroying the lives of thousands, if not millions, of workers in the third world, and capitalists sit here like smugly demonstrating their sort of supposed amazingness of the system, and it's not. It's all from exploitation, even more so in countries where your clothes and sunglasses and computers are made. And this like arrogance of capitalists that they sort of say, oh well, you're using products of capitalism, so therefore you can't criticize capitalism. It's like, well, yeah, we are using things made under capitalism. We want to change that. We want to change the fact that capitalism is a thing that these clothes are made with, because it's making people suffer for our life of relative comfort, which isn't even that comforting, which says a lot about capitalism. So, you know, this like whole stage of argument is just ridiculous.
Constantly bitching, knowing about capitalism, and you're probably sitting there with your iPhone on your soapbox, reading anti-capitalist garbage. Do you not see the irony that what you are using to spread anti-capitalist message, the way you're able to do it is from something that is a product of capitalism?
Yeah, again, no irony. And in fact, when you're saying, "Oh, bitch and piss and moan," firstly, quite mature of you there. But secondly, the idea that like trying to make people's lives better, trying to raise awareness of the horrors of capitalism, can be concerned about the exploitation of workers in the third world is just bitching and pissing and moaning. Like that says everything about the mentality of these people. They don't care about people's lives. They merely care about their ability to make profit of others, which I'm pretty sure none of these people are doing because they're not bosses. So, you know.
I hear a lot of conservatives and libertarians say they do not like socialism and communism because it is basically centralized government control of the economy. And then a whole bunch of socialists and communists will say in response to that,
You idiot, you do not know the definition, the true definition of socialism and communism. It is by definition the laborers controlling the means of production, the laborers controlling the economy without a government, within a stateless society.
I mean, I like how like the high pitched like mocking voice is like correct. Socialism is a worker run society without a state. So like, what's he? Like, I don't understand. People who say, "Oh, well, you know, socialism it's not good because it's got a centralized government." They are not correct in their criticism. They can criticize the centralized government if they want, but that is not socialism. They are confusing workers owning everything, and thus like workers having a collectivized society with a central state which controls everything, which is not the same thing as socialism. So the distinction that the supposed mocking straw man made was actually correct.
so my question is, if true socialism is a stateless society, and when you get this perfect utopian stateless socialist society, how will you maintain and enforce people to abide by socialism?
Well, maintain and force. Like, there's no like, it's not like capitalism where you need a police force to force the laws. You've got worker self-regulation, so workers manage society. Therefore, workers deal with the situations that arise. So, for instance, like you don't need a designated role of enforcement of your system like capitalism has. You've got workers, and I mean, you're already going to see if you had socialism, crime would plummet because you've not got the economic need for stealing and stuff and other crime. So your crimes are going to go down. Through socialism, you could eradicate and drastically reduce a lot of the bigotries and prejudices that lace capitalism and lace society today, which also decrease crime. And you would see a lot less of a need for sort of a policing situation. And the few elements of crime you had left, they could be dealt with workers. By workers, you didn't need a massive task force dealing with stuff when you've eradicated the system that causes a lot of the crime. Anyway.
Say, for example, you get this perfect utopia of yours. Everybody is socialist, everybody is pretty much equal, and they all share the means of production with each other freely while they work. But say that there is a dissident, one dissident that keeps his own piece of land to himself, starts a business there, and with the business, he creates, well, the means of his own labor.
there is no their own land. All land is publicly owned. So I'm not sure what this person is going to be doing. I'm not going to like show up and be like, oh yeah, this is my land. Well, like workers aren't going to have it. I'll just take him off the land. So this guy like like putting a, it's not like where you can just put a sign on a bit of land and be like, oh yeah, this is mine. All land is worker owned. Therefore, everyone owns the land, which is sort of a point really. There's no like big business person who can just show up and be like, oh yeah, it's my land now. Like it doesn't exist. And as for producing their own labor, I mean, it's going to take him a while because who's going to come and work for someone? It's like, oh yeah, it's my land and my labor, but you're going to have it. Like, it's a bit ridiculous, really.
What if he keeps the means of his own labor all to himself and not to everyone else?
Well, I mean, well, what's he going to be doing? If he's like growing his own like vegetable patch, then yeah, fine, have your veg. But I mean, if it's just one person, then I'm not really sure what the problem is, to be honest. Like, he's not selling it, he's not making a profit out of it, so that would be fine. Of course, if it's not the land, if it's land that's publicly owned, I mean, I don't see what he's going to be able to do about it when the workers say to him, "Oh well, sorry, bud, but you grew this using public land, therefore the produce you've made of it is public." But you know,
for example, that there is another dissident who decides, hey, I want to go work
dissident.
for the business owner, and so the employee doesn't get an exact equal share of the means of production by the business owner. What then? Will you
Like, why would this person ever go and work for this person? Under capitalism, you have to work for less than what you produce, because if you don't, you'll stop. Like, no employer, no boss isn't going to ever say you can have a fair proportion of what your labor is put in. No, they're going to say, I'm going to profit off you, or you're not going to have this job and you'll starve. And my 10 other boss friends over down the road are going to say the same thing, because capitalism is a sham. Under socialism, you're not going to see this because you don't have a situation where there's a boss profiting off their workers. All workers own society. So who in the right mind is going to say, oh, you know, there's all these opportunities for me to work and for me to do stuff that's fair and just have a nice life. Oh, but I'm going to go and work for Mr. Businessman who believes in capitalism, doesn't give me a fair amount of like produce for my work and won't even share the goods with me. It's like, that's ridiculous. Who's going to go and work for that person? No one. So this person is going to be by themselves, like doing nothing, because no one is going to be like helping them out, because essentially they're just trying to cling to old poor methods of production on land that's not even theirs.
guys implement a government to overthrow the business owner and seize his private property, all for the sake of making sure that his means of production gets spread out throughout the rest of society?
That
Everyone else in the socialist utopia you dream of.
Oh, I like how this question is so laced. But again, there's no private property under socialism, and indeed, claiming this land was his is to ignore the previous owner of the land. All land was owned by someone else before. It's ridiculous trying to claim that that's not the case. Look at and if you want to claim violence to get rid of them, look at how capitalists got their land. Look at how America was formed. Look at who the Americans had to drive off. Also, the settlers had to drive off to get American land. Like, it's ridiculous trying to claim that like, socialism is this barbaric situation where you got no private property, when capitalism is the exact thing you're describing: barbarism and violence. But no, this question is just not realistic. Like, there's no situation in which this is going to happen. Like, just someone having private property and then having a workforce which like agrees to be exploited. Like,
how will you maintain and enforce your socialism without government?
You don't need a government, you've got workers. Like, I don't, people seem to think government and like power systems are the only situation in which a society can run, when no, teamwork and collaboration and collectivism and worker solidarity is better, because then you have the needs of everyone being met, and the society is at its most productive, most engaged, most like happy. But no, I've got to make my profit, private production. And a fitting end to what was an absolute garbage show. So that is questions capitalists have for communists / socialists. I mean, you could probably whittle this down to like 3 minutes, because half these questions are like the same thing reworded. Just no real attempt to understand what the communists, when they depict, were talking about. No real attempt to ask anything that properly criticizes the arguments presented. It's this sort of sneering attitude the whole way through of just, oh, you're all idiots. Two of them called socialists retarded. Going through more S-Man, a few poor arguments, but at least it seemed like it was from a place of genuinity. JJ, just ridiculous. Alexander Kingsfall, and I don't even know why he was in the video. Humane Minds seemed pretty switched on. He was actually asking sort of things that you might expect to be asked by like someone criticizing socialism, something that actually like pertained to the system in question. Zach had the talk but didn't leave a walk. Who else was there? Incredible Aspie, like bloody hell. That just don't put him in the next one. He's an embarrassment. And who else was there? There was one more person, I think. Let's get back. Alexander Kingsfallen, Zach, S-Man, Aspie, Humane Minds. Okay, maybe it's not. Oh, it just says it there. So yeah, S-Man, Humane Minds are ones maybe talking to further. Zach, maybe. JJ, like, I just don't know. Alexander Kingsfallen and being Incredible Aspie, just ignore them. They're just garbage. Credits too. Edited by S-Man, Zach, so everyone but JJ. Audio by S-Man, don't choose a different song. Produced by Capitalism, was it? Yeah, all right then. Sure. Anyway, I'm done. That is the end of this. I need to go and take a bath or something, just wash myself of this stuff. But in all seriousness, thank you for anyone who listened through this, because it was a bit of a train wreck, if you ask me. And yeah, that was 15 questions capitalists have, or communists / socialists answered. Join you on next time. Please suggest a better video next time, Justin Man, because this was atrocious.